Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first episode on the Neural Network. My name is Vasudevan Lakshmanan, and I'm here with my co-host.
Armaan Priyadarshan. Today we'll be joined by Jacob Jiang, a fellow student at Mass Academy, to discuss a field that AI impacts significantly: education. Having a CS background, CS coursework at Carnegie Mellon University, and experience in public, private, and magnet schools, Jacob has some phenomenal insight on the topic. Jacob, you want to introduce yourself?
Hey, this is Jacob. I'd like to thank Armaan and Vasu for having me on their first episode of the Neural Net. I'm very excited.
Absolutely, Jacob. To start off, let's talk about the elephant in the room: generative AI. Large language models, such as ChatGPT, have developed the capability of not only understanding text, but producing it itself. Now, given how this has such a creative endeavor, how do large language models affect writing assignments and other academic efforts, specifically regarding creative thinking?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. So I would say in recent years, at least, especially with newer models of things like ChatGPT, as well as how available they are online, anyone can really just search them up and use them. There's definitely been notable impact, especially in the past year, in terms of things like writing assignments, with how easy it is to generate topics and just entire writing samples with AI, and definitely how high the quality is. But there's definitely a lot of nuance in terms of how AI can be used in writing. So I would say there's a lot of different possible scenarios where AI can benefit or harm the creative processes in writing and how people use AI.
Absolutely. And I mean, as we've seen ChatGPT and other models grow in the past, we've also seen ChatGPT Zero, an AI detector. So, given that, do you think that AI overall benefits or harms creative thinking and writing? Or do you think it really depends on the user?
Yeah, again, I think it would depend mostly on the user. I mean, from what I've seen, there's a lot of different um, ways that people have used AI, where some are definitely a lot more, in terms of education, harmful towards an individual's education, such as by just generating an entire essay prompt. But I would say there's also like beneficial ways, things like specific wording or like things that are more in the sort of brainstorming process itself, using AI for such a like subtopic generalization and or generation and things of that sort of just like not really creating the final product, but helping the brainstorming sort of process.
So, you mentioned that there's like harmful as well as beneficial ways of using generative AI in education. So, what rules do you think should be in place for or what like standards should be in place for like fair use of LLMs that doesn't violate any like anything or cause like any harmful impact?
I think it would really depend on the intent of a given assignment, whether like what skills are really being tested for an assignment. That would determine what AI sort of usage limitations would be there. For instance, like an essay that's focused more on specific parts of language that have to do more with wording or things of that nature, I would say AI has more potential to be harmful. So things like really just limiting the aspects of AI that would be most harmful to the purpose of the assignment of a given assignment. I think it's really a case by case basis, I would say. But overall, I think any sort of use of AI that involves creating the whole finished product basically for you without having to do much thinking, I think that can be agreed on across the board as generally harmful. But besides that, I think it really is a case by case basis on how do you limit AI.
I agree. I think that that's a major issue, especially inside this specific atmosphere. But regarding in-class timed writing and other assignments of that such, as you started to allude to, how do you think that those assignments can encourage more creative thinking, specifically regarding ChatGPT and other large language models? Or do you think that the artificial intelligence doesn't have a space when it comes to in-class timed writing?
So I think looking towards the future, the use of AI will be more and more significant and common in both day to day and academic settings. So I think while currently the current system doesn't really have place for AI per se, in terms of how assignments are really designed and how like entire curriculums are really based off of, I think um, the more time that passes and the more relevant and almost all encompassing that AI gets, the more likely that assignments will be designed around trying to find interesting ways to use AI. Because there's definitely parts of things like even in person timed writing that would be able to be done with AI, since the main benefit of AI is how really like efficient and quick it can do thinking, even if thinking might not be accurate. So for things like in class essays where you're trying to get a lot of ideas down really quickly and really like organize thoughts, I think AI definitely has a lot of potential for interesting uses in that case. But I think right now it would take probably a lot of redesign in terms of curriculum and assignments to really get to that point where those interesting uses are sort of encouraged and beneficial in
Yeah,
current assignments.
I think you bring up a really great point because looking in the past 6 months, even, we've seen how AI has been able to skyrocket, and it really comes down to the fact that school systems and teachers have to adapt to these models because they're here to stay. ChatGPT will not be gone in the next week or even the next year. If anything, it's going to grow even bigger. Armand, you got anything to add?
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree with you. I think that like instead of working against AI, you have to learn to work with it. And as such, like one of the biggest consequences of that is like assignment like design and like figuring out how to like make assignments that test like the right things. So Jacob, what are your thoughts on like redesigning assignments and how could you create assignments that work around AI?
So I think really there's a lot of questions in that realm that have to deal more with the current state of like schooling systems and whatnot. But besides like logistics around that, how AI could specifically be used around assignments is a really interesting question, since the capabilities of AI are definitely more different than any other sort of tool that's been seen before, and how AI will really contribute to different parts of um, things like writing as well in the future. I think it really depends on what is sort of determined by people actually using AI in writing. Like what sort of things they figure out AI is especially useful for that are sort of unexpected, and then which parts of AI are actually sort of like more difficult to use. Since incorporating AI into assignments, the purpose would probably be to have AI like features be learned by students and not really just like every single time just putting in a prompt and getting out a response. I think it would definitely be more of finding out what interesting uses AI can have that are more unexpected and which one of those are like practicable in a sense. Which one of those can be added into assignments for students to really play around with and learn. And I think even just potentially having like some sort of experimental assignments in general where students are able to really test the limits of what AI can do for writing and also discovering sort of new abilities of that as well. So I think it is sort of um, unknown or not super clear what AI, specifically AI assignments, could incorporate. But I think in general, like besides the obvious um, sort of uh, generation and idea generation that is pretty much commonly used by AI, yeah, the use case for AI. I think besides those, there's really just a lot of experimentation to be done.
And also, do you think that there could be assignments that are like AI proof, meaning that you can have access to AI and it still would like encourage thinking on your own?
Mm. I think the more personal an assignment gets, the harder it is to use AI for, since really AI is like based on information. So more personal or emotional sort of assignments that are meaningful to an individual in a sense are both AI proof, and it doesn't really encourage the use of AI, I would feel, besides things like wording. Um, but any sort of like things that are more in the realm of like poetry or journal work, um, things that have to do with personal experience and putting that onto paper would be out of the realm of AI use more so, I would say.
Yeah, totally
Absolutely.
agree.
Because as we've seen inside the past, the real difference between AI is the fact that we don't have that personalization factor. And you can clearly differentiate between AI text and human text because you're able to see those emotions come through inside good, excellent writing. So looking at AI once more, but this time, could it be used to actually help teachers? For example, one topic that we've seen pop up in the news recently is AI test generation. So how do you think AI test generation could be used as a means to limit cheating or enhance question making as a whole for tests?
Yeah, I think AI test generation and sort of curriculum design and all that sort of realm for use of AI in education, I think that's a really strong suit since there's very little potential for malicious intent when using it in that purpose. And having teachers like review anything generated by AI, um, I think that has really high potential for positive use. And I think with especially how many sort of cases there are where students might complain about curriculums, whether they're actually bad or whether it's just student complaints. But in sort of those cases, I think having AI tools and just how easily accessible they are for like no expense, I think that is a really big use case that um, definitely will grow as time progresses in terms of positive AI in education. So I think overall that's a really positive area for use, and I think there's a lot of potential in how effective it can be.
Yep. And as for like a bit more of like a darker side of AI use in education, so AI plagiarism is a pretty big concern when it comes to having AI being used for, especially like with the writing assignments or with individual work. So with AI plagiarism, do you ever think that AI use would be detectable, and what would the implications of this be?
Yeah, I think there's sort of an arms race currently with AI development as well as AI detection, which is a really interesting sort of situation. I think yeah, the primary downside of AI use in from a student perspective is definitely things like plagiarism, especially with like how earlier we mentioned AI is not really as good as for personal sort of writing and very good for informational and analytical writing, which is definitely has more potential for plagiarism, especially considering how large language learning models um, learn off of existing data. So I think really the use case for plagiarism detectors needs to be investigated more, since that's pretty much one of the primary downsides that at least most people think of when they think of AI in education. And also for preventing accidental plagiarism. Um, I know currently there are language models developed that have um, sort of source checking built into them. Um, and I think that sort of direction is the right approach, especially if you're going to make AI tools that are more targeted for use in education. Because like ChatGPT is often used by students and in education, but not specifically designed for it. So I think anything that would be specifically designed for education, that would be something that would be need to be heavily looked into. Sort of both plagiarism detection and plagiarism prevention when generating prompts.
So, do you think that there should be like specific like language models that are developed specifically for education use? And like, what are your thoughts on like potentially using like some sort of watermarking or some filtering for determining like whether like something is generated by AI or not?
Yeah, I think that's definitely very important, and there's a lot of potential in terms of AI development to go in that direction. And like you said, I think that there should be specific platforms or AI tools that are developed specifically targeted towards education, just because of how much nuance there is with things like plagiarism and um, being beneficial for assignments as well.
Looking at it holistically, we've seen this in the past how when you look at plagiarism, the one major way to avoid it is citations. But obviously that comes at a different extent when we add AI to the picture. Because now we don't know how much AI might have influenced the thinking of a writer. So in your opinion, how do you think AI should be cited in the future? And do you think current AI citation methods are valid?
Yeah, that's really interesting because the way that language learning models learn off of data, it would be very hard to, or even near impossible to, generate the citations for any data that it gets. Um, but there definitely could be, there's definitely AI potential in sort of reversing a prompt to find where information might come from, or reversing a generated block of text. So I think just really in general, the AI plagiarism um, sort of field, there's a lot of potential and need for development, I would say.
Yeah, I think like models such as like Bard and like Bing Chat already have like existing features for citing sources. But do you think that the actual original sources should be cited or the model itself?
I think both would be the best case scenario, or some sort of like hybrid citation, since wording and things like that would be generated by an actual AI tool, like the way the information is presented, how it's worded, and how it's organized in the generated chunk of text. But the information is obviously from um, existing sources. And I think what differentiates something like an AI tool gathering information from sources and like a journal that, or like a news article, for instance, that does research using sources. I think the difference is that with AI, even though it's sort of doing the same thing, gathering information and organizing it, like in, for instance, like a newspaper article, you could find the sources of information that they use. Whereas for an AI prompt, if you just cited the AI tool, there's no real way to go further and find where the information is from. And I think for use cases like in academic or like scholarly writing, really having the sources for information is really, really important, since that allows other people to investigate the sources you use for any error or use those sources themselves for their own purposes. So I think both citing the sources of information and the presenter of the information, which would be the AI tool, are both important.
Yeah, I'm really glad you brought that up because looking at citations as a whole, it's becoming a lot more widespan over different grades. Because I remember reading an article by Utopia on December 5th of last year, which conceptualized that artificial intelligence is not only becoming bigger on high school, where we can see the use almost every single day, varying from assignment to assignment, but also in middle school. So how do you think like AI augmented curriculums should be implemented and how faculty and administration should start to integrate AI really early on? Do you think it's ethical to have it in elementary schools or do you think it should only be limited to older, more mature populations?
I think that sort of approach with like maturity in terms of AI use, I think I would side more with having it introduced at, like, for instance, an elementary, middle school level, since I think that's important for really establishing how AI should be used and sort of preventing misuse. Since the way it's used right now is sort of outside of the school curriculum, and that sort of makes it so there's more likely for misuse since it's not really integrated into the curriculum or guided. And since AI is just so new, there's definitely not enough information in some places for how to properly use AI or its downsides. So I think really just with how prevalent AI is going to become, having it introduced earlier is needed to establish how to properly use it and just have knowledge on how it works since its impact will be growing in the future.
Yeah, because if we're able to really build a foundation for those younger generations and we teach them the ethics revolving I think absolutely it could be used as a tool to really bolster our society and our progression. Armand, you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so as for, like the actual specific integration of AI into like curriculum augmentation, so how do you think that AI or like personalized learning could be a positive force in developing curriculums, and how could it be used to improve what already like is there in terms of like standards and what students are learning?
Yeah, sort of like I said earlier, I think AI has a good potential of, since how much knowledge it pretty much quote unquote knows, establishing sort of like a baseline for curriculums, but there is definitely a need to prevent inaccurate use as well. So having teachers look over anything that is generated by AI, as well as potentially have like earlier AI verification tools of like verifying sources and things like that, things of that nature. But I think AI curriculum generation, just because of how almost extensive its knowledge is, curriculums could be more detailed and have like almost a standardized level of not quality per se, but content in terms of how much content they might have, and really being able to know what prompts to prompt an AI with to generate good curriculums and course materials is also something to look into for the future, I would say. So I think the potential for AI in curriculums is extremely high with how it can do it very quickly and effectively, incorporating a lot of information on whatever course the curriculum is for, but definitely still having misuse prevention
And
is important.
do you think that AI could also be used for like personalized learning, as for like actually adapting to like the needs and like current status of the student? And with this, do you think that AI could also potentially replace like teachers or act as like a learning companion for students?
I think to an information presenting sort of point of view, AI will at one point exceed teachers in terms of accuracy and how much information they're conveying. But I think the and eventually I think it'll completely replace teachers, but that will be at a point that is very, very, very far in the future. And I think before then though, the point is that teachers and sort of classroom interactions are also sort of as important to learning as just really the way that information is presented. The way that teachers can, at least to some effective extent, adapt to the needs of a student and just interact and build a sort of positive relationship with that student. And I think that's crucial to the learning experience as well, with almost how schools are social environments as much as they are learning environments. So I think while AI has the potential to exceed teachers in information presentation and that sort of regard, I think the sort of personal communication and connection part of um, students and teacher relationships. Um, I think that'll keep teachers very relevant for quite some time until AI gets to the point where it replaces like every job.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And to kind of make this conversation come full circle, I think we really led to a really interesting point that you mentioned. So looking at AI specifically, as we started, we talked about writing assignments. But how do you think that AI could be used to actually play a different role with writing and specifically grading as a whole? So how might the integration of artificial intelligence impact grading certain writing assignments? Do you think it could provide a method that's more fair than what we see currently, as it could limit the amount of biases that go in within writing?
Yeah, so I think AI has a really powerful potential in that regard since, again, how much information it's trained off of. AI is very actually good at incorporating feedback in terms of generating prompts. If you tell an AI to generate something and then tell it to regenerate that prompt with different specifications, it can do so extremely accurately and with a lot of versatility. So I think in terms of grading and feedback giving, it definitely is very powerful in that sense too, with how it can definitely be used by things people like teachers to get extra analysis into writing. Whether all that feedback and analysis by an AI is used or not is dependent on perhaps the purpose of an assignment or the perspective of the teacher and the given student. But definitely AI has a lot of potential of giving extra feedback and looking at things like writing samples in ways that just a teacher would not be able to look at in all that extent. So I think for grading and feedback giving, um, tools like AI have a lot of potential. But again, there's that aspect of misuse where um, completely relying on an AI to grade something could be a very bad rabbit hole to fall down. Um, so there's a lot of potential there, but again, almost with everything with AI, there's a lot of risk to be taken into account and a
Yeah.
lot of work to try to mitigate those risks.
So, as AI advances, do you think that it could possibly be used to introduce like objectivity and standardization in larger scale evaluation? So, like for example, like introducing a more objective opinion than like a teacher on like a large writing assignment or with like admissions or even like standardized tests.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was thinking about for the previous question, how AI could potentially lead to more standardization. I think it would take a lot more, perhaps, work or research to figure out just how standardized AI can be, because AI can also vary a lot. So, either finding a way to utilize or create even dedicated AI tools that have levels of standardization or just evaluating the current level of standardization that is possible with AI tools is important in that regard. And I think that at least in its current state, you couldn't really just use it and have it be called standardization. I think more work would need to be done to really um, establish and have that be the case.
Yeah, I think that's like a trend that
But
we've
yeah,
seen
there's
with
potential.
many of these questions. Sorry for interrupting you there. Um, where we've been capable of seeing how artificial intelligence and specifically its growth is really dependent on the future. Because AI, as you've mentioned, has a lot of potential, but it's really the safe use of AI that will help within these processes. Especially because I'm pretty sure Armand mentioned admissions. One of the things that we have to look for is biases. And while some AI models don't have many biases within them, there's absolutely many others that do. So I think as we go into the future, like you mentioned, we'll be capable of seeing how that can change, and AI might be able to play a role within standardization inside admissions, even to SATs and other factors. Armand, did you have another question you wanted to ask?
Actually, you covered exactly that. It was just more about like the risks of biases and how like that could play into the ethical use of AI and standardization and objectivity because you can't exactly consider an AI objective if it does have those biases that are present. But I think you covered a lot of the main points.
Perfect. So that concludes our episode for today. Thank you so much for being here, Jacob. You have any last message you want to share with the audience?
Yeah, thank you for having me. I mean, really, as an overview for sort of almost all AI topics, is that there's a lot of potential, but there's also a lot of risk, which is, I mean, for every sort of new technology, but I think especially for AI. And the cases of its misuse are very similar to each other in terms of just need to verify AI, how the AI works, or verify what it presents, and checking things like sources and preventing against plagiarism. But yeah, thanks for having me. There was a lot of interesting topics you guys brought up today. Yeah, thank you for having me.
Yep. Thanks for joining us, Jacob. And tune in next week to hear our episode about AI in the workforce, where we'll be analyzing the benefits and disadvantages. See you next week. Armaan and Vasu out.